Hi guys, welcome to part 2 of Psychic Insight on Certain Things. And if you haven't watched part 1 yet, that was all about the goat and a few other things. So you might need that in order to watch this. And today we're going to talk about the following things: the voice to skull, which I didn't write here on the screen for obvious reasons, noise intrusion. Kind of ties into AI really causing noise interruptions and disturbances, how the mind is a tool, migrants, coincidence, and more about places in general. Okay, before we start off with that, something that I actually want to talk about is goath, Goath. And this kind of just came about because someone left a comment on our previous video. I think they wanted to write goat, but what came out instead was goath. And I was like, oh, is this related to goth somehow? Which, goth was like a movement, or still is a movement to a form or another. But yeah, goath is the hill of death. It's a hill near Jerusalem, mentioned in certain Bible passages and everything. I think that's what they turned Golgotha into, or Golgotha. So also what goth means is there's a Luciferian goath ritual. So goath and goth, I keep wondering maybe that is related or not. Interesting how when you just add an H to goat, you get a whole new meaning. That's kind of also a bit related to the entire goat symbology, at least in my opinion. So just wanted to point that out. Now, another thing is, before we dive into the other topics, coincidence. So which word lies in coincidence? Coin. And that's just something, I was kind of looking at the word because I had used it recently and I was like, what do you mean coin? Why do they put a coin in coincidence? And so when you look up the entire origin, the roots of coincidence, it does come from Latin, but it also comes from French, supposedly. So according to dictionaries, it means exact correspondence in substance or nature. From French, coincidence, not sure how you pronounce that in French, and from medieval Latin, coincidere, which literally means to fall upon together. Supposedly in Latin, it's from cum and incidere, which is like together and fall upon. So when you look at coin, which coin is a monetary value that's in coincidence, right? Coin comes from the Latin cunios, meaning corner. And when it first arose in English, it meant wedge, but quickly adopted the sense of a thing stamped or a piece of money because they were stamping metal in wedge shapes. Also very interesting. So, every time I look at coincidence now, I just don't see it in the same light that I did beforehand. And I thought that was worth pointing out to you guys in case anyone, I don't think there are any coincidences in the form of alphabets and the way certain words are shaped. And I actually want to have a whole separate video on the different types of alphabets and what's like the oldest alphabet supposedly in the entire world and what are the newer ones, how many letters you have in all these different alphabets and what the numerology is behind all of that. But I do think certain things, there's certain hidden agendas in certain words, obviously. And so having coin and coincidence, like having this monetary value in a lot of our words that we use, it's not just coincidence, it's also other things. And something to think about. Okay, so noise intrusion, right? Okay, so another thing is, so when I was kind of doing this really intense psychic reading on things, first of all, with a voice of skull or a voice to skull technology that they have. So as you guys know, I have a dog, right? And what I was literally hearing during one of these journeys that I was taking was a form of barking. And it wasn't a certain type of barking, you couldn't necessarily tell what type of dog was barking around, but they kind of put this barking in my head. I think it was definitely like a distraction technique. And I would say, I know I'm not imagining this, but at the end of the day, I was kind of imagining it because they put this thing in my head. And the reason I know that it wasn't real was because my dog, who was lying next to me while I was doing all of this, she did not react at all. And for anyone who's curious about it, like if she would hear barking in the neighborhood, or she would just, because the barking was for pretty long, she usually perks her head up and reacts a little bit to it. She kind of looks out the window and those type of things. So I was doing this read on a lot of different things, including these topics. And when I was really getting to the gist of it, and it was really, really in it, let's put it that way, there was this random barking, and it would just not stop, similar to how you hear barking in the background of certain videos, or you just kind of hear barking in your own neighborhood. You're like, oh, what type of obnoxious dog is barking around? So it was barking and barking and barking. It would not stop. And I was like, okay, if this barking were really real, my dog would have at least reacted a little bit, because she wasn't asleep or anything. And she would have at least, perked up her head and all of that. And then it kind of dawned upon me that whatever technology they're using to also put thoughts in your head, they're using the same to put random stuff in your head and make you believe it's real. And it might sound crazy to people who haven't experienced that yet, or people who just don't believe in any of this, and that's fine. You can always turn this video off. And, I personally, after that incident, I also kind of wonder, okay, what are the other things they put in our heads, or that they've put in my head in particular, if they're trying to do that with the barking, which is, it's kind of intrusive, because you think it's a normal sound. You think it's something that occurs on a daily basis. I mean, it's like almost like a nature sound in that sense. What else really do they put in people's heads to make them believe it's like a cat meow? But I do think the barking is a more intrusive form, because when something's barking in your head, you kind of lose focus, and that's really what they wanted to accomplish, at least in my opinion. So it was kind of like this very distracting thing that they were trying to do, because the outside noises were not distracting enough, which they already put so much outside, especially if you live in a city like this, which is really busy and noisy. They always have fire trucks running around my neighborhood. They always have sirens, like random ambulances. Every time I do a session with someone, meaning a shamanic healing session on someone, there's always something. There's either like a honking going on, people turn really crazy all of a sudden, and it's usually in the beginning of the session. I do have to say that too. Or it's during the part where I do the actual shamanic journey for the person and I get more insight, which is needed. So it's usually during those really important parts where you're trying to focus and dive into it and you need peace and calm. Or it's during this other part where you're trying to get more deeper psychic insight than ever before. So in my life, they usually do the honking, and it doesn't even matter if I'm here in a huge city, because I've done these type of sessions in the most rural areas too. I've been around a whole bunch of areas when I was doing this. When I was traveling, I did sessions as well. All of a sudden, there's something around you, there's just a random something that usually is never there, and it really tries to interrupt your life and disrupt the session, or disrupt something important that you're trying to do, such as recording a video. Like I already discussed, like there's screaming noises of children in the neighborhood that usually should be quiet at a certain time, but sometimes I have to push back recording videos because of that. So that's normal that you kind of hear these outside interruptions, which I do think are not necessarily an imaginary thing like the barking that I just discussed, but they're kind of real because other people hear them too. And the way they do that is by getting to those people, kind of getting to the people in the cars who all of a sudden are honking, controlling their thoughts, meaning, okay, now you have to honk because now you're obnoxious and mad and furious with the person ahead of you who's not really moving. Now you have to really honk, and that's going to have an effect on the people around you. And it's really, when you are, even if you are used to a honking neighborhood, Like, I just noticed that every single time, you never really get used to it, honestly. Like, I mean, Egypt was another thing. Egypt was extremely noisy. Even if you live in an extremely noisy environment, doesn't matter if it's first world, second world, third world at this point, you never really fully get used to the noise because our natural state, our natural condition that we really are in is peace and quiet. And it's very hard in today's world, no matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you are in a more rural landscape or if you are in a city like I am, or whatever country you're in nowadays. And I feel they've really been pushing this for the past few decades for sure, at least since the industrialization and on. But for the past few years and moments and whatsoever that we've all been around, it's just gotten noisier and noisier. They keep inventing all these devices, like inventing the car. You know, I personally have asked myself recently, was the invention of a car really the best thing that ever happened to humanity? Because a car actually ruined a lot of nature. You know, if you look at all the roads that were built and kind of built through forests and built through all these things, yeah, it's great that everyone has a car nowadays and you can travel wherever you want, you know, airplanes, all of that. Sure, the technology is great in the sense of you're not confined to your village or the town you're in, and you can have a life where you're road tripping and you're exposed to other cultures and mindsets and nature landscapes and all of that. Yeah, all of that is great, but I couldn't stop, I couldn't help and wonder if having a car was like, almost everyone has a car nowadays, right? Even though the prices keep going up and they're really pushing the hybrid agenda with that and electric cars and whatnot. Everyone needs to have a car, especially here in the US. Even in Europe, a lot of people have cars, despite having public transport, all of that. Having a car is just sort of something people want. Did it kind of ruin society because everyone's confined to this little space where they're in their own bubble when they're driving their car, and you don't really have much control over a person that's driving a car next to you or around you. So if someone kind of loses it and their car just kind of swirls around the highway, or they're mind controlled or whatever, and they cause an accident for whatever reason, your life could be endangered in that sense. I mean, obviously there are many other ways your life can be endangered, but I kind of just feel if you are really under psychic attack, a car accident is a perfect way for the controllers to kind of push that on you. Just, this is more like of a darker thought pattern, but everything happens at this point. And anyone who is targeted, I think you understand what I mean. So I was walking around my neighborhood and I was really with the honking going on, and it doesn't happen all the time, as you know, because I am able to record videos and have peace every once so often. But whenever it does happen, it's huge. It has like this impact on your nervous system where you're almost like, this is not natural. This is really trying to get to you. It's really trying to get to your mind, your body, your nervous system in general. So I was walking around and wondering, is the car really the best invention for humanity overall? Because actually it causes a whole bunch of pollution in that sense. It did destroy a lot of nature, similar to how everyone's building homes all around the cities now, because no one really wants to live in the city after 2020, right? Like everyone kind of escaped to beach towns or like 4+ hours away from here, those type of things. So everyone's trying to build their own communities somewhere else, but they're kind of ruining the energy of the place that was there before. They're ruining the prices for the locals. They're driving the prices really up, especially real estate prices. And they're also kind of ruining nature, because a lot of these things that are being built nowadays, that's where birds had their nests and all of those other things, right? So I'm not coming to you from an activist standpoint at all, but I kind of was wondering, if you look at how cities looked like before cars were even there, and then especially like the 60s, 70s, 80s on, which cities in and of itself haven't really changed that much from the 70s and on. I keep looking at historic pictures, especially from the city that I am currently. The most change that happened was definitely from the industrialization and on. But when I look back at 1970 to now, and you look back even at the fashion and everything, people are kind of sometimes still wearing things from the 90s or 70s, especially here, because it's like hip and cool, and especially with the hipster culture and whatnot. Not so much has changed specifically in terms of roads and everything from the 70s and on, but the most change did happen from like the 1920s to the 1960s or so. So yeah, you can't just, I mean, it really does make you wonder about a lot of things in terms of what were a lot of these things just, you know, obviously they were following an agenda with it, but was it really that smart to hand over the invention of a car to everyone and to do this and whatever? So with the noise intrusion, you have those outside noises such as sirens, such as the boom boom boxes. Those are huge here too. Like I was walking around once again in my neighborhood, and for example, when I just kind of walk around, I don't necessarily have anything in my ear because I just really want to focus on where I am. I don't want to be necessarily distracted and all of that. So there was this person, he didn't even have a boom boom box, but he literally had his tablet-sized cell phone, because nowadays cell phones need to be humongous, or the opposite. Some people have tiny cell phones, but he had like one of those huge cell phones. I'm not sure if it was Samsung or whatever. And out of this obnoxious cell phone, which he didn't have any earplugs or anything in, no headphones, he was playing some weird music. You know, I don't know if it was Turkish music or whatever. It was some music I didn't recognize. And on his entire walk from wherever he was to wherever he had to go, he was basically holding his tablet-sized cell phone right next to his ear and playing that obnoxious music in the loudest volume ever. So the entire neighborhood could basically hear him, or whoever was walking past him. And I kind of just, you know, I just observed that, and I'm like, well, this is just insanity. This person can't even do a proper 2 or 3 block radius walk to walk from one destination to another without having their music blasting, which in my opinion wasn't even that great of music, but music's obviously subjective. I do realize that. So whatever the reason was for him to blast that music like that, you know, he wasn't even dancing or anything. It was just this weird, you know, can't stand silence or whatever. And so it was one of those really obnoxious noise intrusions, in my opinion. And I mean, if you have to hear that without you really inviting that into your environment, yeah, it's going to be disruptive, right? Like when I turn on my own music, at least I know this is the music I like and all of that. But when you just hear random other people's music out there, you're just like, okay, I really wasn't planning on listening to this. And now you kind of have to listen to it because you're walking the same direction. So that type of intrusion is more the outside intrusion, which they really push. And what I've noticed in particular in my own life, and I've also seen it in other people's lives, you just don't recognize that it's happening to you until you really start paying attention to you. That's another thing. Because I always felt, no matter at which point I was in my life and wherever I lived in my life, there was always a form of noise intrusion they pushed. It was always very hard to be in silence, even when I was in very remote areas, wherever that even was. Doesn't even matter what country that was. There was always all of a sudden something, you know, screeching car wheels out of nowhere, which is like, oh my gosh, is an accident going to happen? There's those type of things. So once you start paying attention to how much noise they're pushing into your life, you'll get an understanding of, wow, this is actually really happening. And then you can probably also get an understanding of how you could just start ignoring that or kind of not have it get to you to the same degree. So let's just say you're more of a, I don't want to say unconscious, but more like you're not as conscious about it, that they're pushing it onto you, and you get aggravated very easily. So whenever that happens to you, like for whenever a honking or whatever occurs, which I see all the time with people who are walking past me, something honks and they're like, they get all mad and aggravated, you know. I'm just like, okay, so they're trying to push that into your reality. And if you just don't let it affect you or get to you and affect your nervous system, you're better at dealing with it in that sense. If that makes any sense. I think it does. And so what I found is outside of those other the noise intrusions that are happening outside of you, now they're also having all these intrusions in your head, which you know, I don't consider myself a crazy person or anything, absolutely not. But that was one of those moments where I literally had another animal sitting next to me who would have reacted to that noise and who didn't react, where I literally knew, oh, interesting. They were having this random bark in my head, and I'm the only one who hears that, and it's actually interrupting the journey that I'm taking. It's interrupting the thought process. It's interrupting my intuition. So interesting. So I also wonder if this is what schizophrenic people hear, or people in general who have some sort of mental disorder, and they would probably hear this on a daily basis, from my assumption. So I literally did not even necessarily pay attention to that until it happens, which I don't think it's really even happened to me. Well, it's hard to say because, you know, usually you're alone, so you're not necessarily with others, but maybe someone had that case where you're like, you were with friends and you're like, did you hear that? And other people didn't necessarily hear that. So maybe it's different types of awarenesses people have, or maybe it's really one of those scenarios where they were pushing something inside of your head. And that's kind of like the voice to skull. Now, the voice to skull is really more about them pushing intrusive thoughts and intrusive words in you. And that really has to do with a lot of rituals that are also happening closer to, you know, let's say Hollywood. Or whatever. Like, it's definitely happening to celebrities and sacrifice lambs and all of that. But of course, makes you wonder to how many people does it really affect who are not even around that area or not really related to that industry, right? And so after experiencing all of this, especially lately, I just keep coming back to this entire thing that, you know, the mind is a tool. Everything is very important. The mind is important, but the mind is really one of the most powerful tools. And they are trying to get to our mind every single minute they can, every single day they can. I strongly believe the 2020 occurrences, you know, a lot of people lost their mind because they were so isolated from others, especially with the first 2 months of where everyone was kind of locked away and everything. All of that really was trying to get to people's heads and people's minds. And if you really see how depressed people looked after that, you know, like everyone was super unhappy 2020 and 2021, and then they all caved to the agendas that came after that. At least most people did. Yeah, it's interesting how I feel it all started with that. Obviously, it started, you know, before that already, hundreds of thousands of years ago, whatever. But that was just a prime example of how they were trying to really reshape people's heads and minds, and how they were able to a certain extent. Not every single person, but certainly a few people or a lot of people, depending on where you are. And so the mind is a very powerful tool, and possibly the most powerful tool. And I'm convinced you can crack certain things with your mind, such as the aging code, which we kind of discussed in the last video. AI is heartless, and it sees us, it sees the souls as a number. But what you have to keep reminding yourself is whenever someone wants to just see you as a number, and this also goes to certain things like, you know, when you go into bureaucratic things like offices, the DMV, or whatever it is, you're talking to a soul, you're not talking to a number. And as soon as you put the heart back into a conversation, especially if it's like a face-to-face conversation with a person, you know, let's just say a bank teller or like an official person or whatever, you can get to people's hearts and emotions through that. So what they're trying to pull off right now with the entire automated system, you know, everything's automated. Whenever you want to call up anything, really, you know, like any type of number, you can't even get past an automated selection. You rarely even, I mean, if you're calling an office or whoever it is you need to call, you can't even get past like the first few moments where you need to push numbers. At least here in the US, I think it's similar in other countries too. You need to push a few numbers to kind of state the reason you're calling, and if it even needs a representative, or if it can just kind of be replied to in an automated way, those type of things. So that's all AI. AI is heartless. And, you know, you're talking to a soul, not a number. So you have to keep remembering that and reminding yourself of that. AI is distracting and loud. Another example is all the technology around you. For example, even the air conditioning, which for me in the summer, you know, you obviously need air conditioning. no matter what type you have, if you have one of those newer ones or one of those older window units, whatever you have, the AC is always so loud, right? And so that's kind of, I had this one moment where I was literally like, I can't stand this loud AC anymore. Like, I literally can't wait to just turn this thing off for another few months or so and never deal with this again. And it made me wonder, is that what AI is? You know, AI is distracting and loud, and it's very hard to focus when everything's always so loud around you, like I already kind of described. Did it all start with the industrialization, robbing us of our peace and forgetting about how peaceful nature is? Because I'm sure at one point, no matter where you were in the world, you don't even have to live somewhere in Chile or Ecuador for this, but anywhere where you were in the world, at one point, every nation, tribe, culture was living one, was kind of being one with nature in that form. One with nature being not necessarily like, oh, everything's dandy and whatnot, but they could tell, oh, when the wind goes this direction, we're going to have a storm. Or when the crop looks like this, we're going to have a bad summer or a bad winter ahead. So I do feel people were definitely more intuitive without all that added noise that came with the industrialization. And I also feel, you know, when we are with peace, at peace with the nature around us, we're also in our most natural state. So a lot of these things are being pushed for the mind to go overboard, to exhaust itself, possibly also overthink itself. And so aside from the mind, you obviously also have the body and all of that, which, you know, the body is a very powerful tool in and of itself too. So it's not just the mind. Okay, immigrants, that's another one I wanted to talk about. Okay, so especially here where I am, you do see an impact of it, you know, and I'm personally not someone who just ignores what's going on in my city, because I'm someone who's out and about. I take the train, I walk around Midtown, I go to certain events, I meet friends, all of that. So yeah, I mean, I haven't yet been to the area where supposedly the migrants are sleeping on the street that's closer to Grand Central. I have actually not been there yet. I was wondering whether or not I should go there, but at the same time, not really sure I want to see that. But you obviously can't ignore things happening here. And you know, I can't ignore like this random boy all of a sudden. Like, you have all these, you always had them, but you have them more now. And I think they are migrants in that form. And I do think they belong to a certain street gang, by the way. So you have all these boys that are selling candy in the subway, and usually those would be more local boys. You know, usually they would be from Gran Canarsie or Betsy or whatever, but these are actual, they look like migrants boys. You know, they look pretty Latin. They don't really speak English at all, at least from my understanding. And what I've noticed, because I took the subway a week ago and this happened, like there was this random migrant boy. He was trying to sell me whatever candy he had. I'm like, no, I actually don't need this. Get it out of my face. You know, I said it in the nicest way possible. And then I noticed him looking over at this other guy who was a teenager, or maybe like 19, 20 years old. Very hard to tell sometimes how old people are. And it almost seemed like that was a form of either his buddy or a handler, like kind of like a street gang handler or whatever. I have no idea, but then I started paying attention to this on other occasions too, and it always seemed like there was some random other Latin dude overseeing these kids somehow, or another woman, which I'm not sure if the woman was even the mother or if she was just maybe another handler. Or it's very hard. You know, you talk about trafficking that's going on, especially in Arizona, Texas, Oklahoma, Utah, that area. I'm sure it's happening up here too, because it's definitely happening in North Carolina as well. So there's a lot of things that go into it. But yeah, you can't ignore that you do have more migrants here, definitely on the streets and in other places, of course. Now, what you kind of have to think about, though, is where are these migrants coming from? You know, they're coming from Venezuela, they're coming from Guatemala. I mean, I don't think they're really coming from Mexico, but they're coming like from other places. So they're coming from poor areas, maybe Chile, Ecuador. I don't know. Actually, it depends on where they're coming from. But wherever they're coming from, including Mexico, why are those areas poor? What made those poor? And it all leads back to the energy of those places, right? Kind of what I talked about in the last two videos already. Mexico didn't turn into a drug cartel zone because of nothing. You know, Mexico has this huge Mayan energy. It has, in parts of it, I think it also has, what's the other? Zapotec, that's more to Oaxaca. So it has all these different tribal areas that used to be tribal. The Inca, close to Peru, also humongous trafficking issue, humongous violence, humongous crime. Venezuela, I'm not sure what tribe was around there, but you get the idea. Like every country, including Guatemala, they have whoever was living there before, that's the energy imprint of the land. And even before those tribes were living there, there was a form of energy imprint in the land. So why are these third world countries poor to begin with? And I've been asking myself that every single time, because I've been in a lot of third world countries at this point. I've been in Latin American third world countries. I've been in the Middle East, which a lot of those are third world countries. You know, it's Southeast Asia, depends on how you define a third world country, but a few of those definitely are. And Africa is a whole nother ball game. Like outside of the Middle East, obviously that is a whole nother ball game. And you have to also ask yourself, okay, yeah, the colonization definitely didn't do it a favor, but the violence that's going on in Africa is another level. And there's a story behind that too. So anyhow, why are these areas poor to begin with? Because it didn't come out of nowhere. I don't think you can just blame the colonizers, which a lot of people love to blame the colonizers. Oh, the European colonizers who ruined an entire continent and yada yada. I don't think that's really how it works. I mean, it's making it a bit easy. There's an energy to that land that was kind of caused by something that was there beforehand, and it's just re-emphasized by all these conflicts that are happening there. But why exactly were these areas poor to begin with, and why are people desperate to leave those areas? And they've always kind of been desperate to leave. You know, it's not just now that it's occurring. Now it's to a different extreme, obviously. And a lot of Latin America is trying to get up to the US or Mexico or other places. But it didn't come out of nowhere that these places are impacted and that there's drug wars and cartel things going on. And so what's going on there? You know, like how did the energy of that sacred place, because a lot of these places are very sacred. You know, I would definitely say a lot of Latin America has huge energy that you can feel when you're there. You know, like you can, even like Costa Rica is a prime example. I know Costa Rica is more like the Caribbean in that sense, but or certain parts of Guatemala, you know, you can definitely feel, wow, this is an energetically powerful place, but it's completely ruined by the violence and crime around it, where you don't even feel safe to visit those places at a certain hour of day. You know, basically when you're in a place like that, especially in the Mayan ruins and everything, which I'm not a huge fan of the Mayans, as I already said in previous videos, the Mayans were one of the most brutal tribes out there. The way they're tortured, they own people, and they tortured the refugees that, or the captives that they held. That is also maybe worth another video, but basically you can feel the vortexes, you can feel the energy of certain places, and you can feel it more when they're in a more abandoned area. So aside from Chichen Itza, which is basically the Disneyland of spirituality or whatever at this point, I feel you can actually feel the energy more in places like Coba, which is in the middle of nowhere. And you can also feel it more when you go to like the north of Guatemala, which is like Tikal, around the Flores area. So when you are there, you definitely, you know, you feel a lot, but it's not safe. You would never really be able to go there in the middle of the night because someone would try to rob you or assault you or even kill you. And is it really worth it after all? I mean, it's just, yeah, I don't know. So anyhow, with the entire migrant issue, why are they trying to leave their own country? What's going on there? And how did it turn that way? Because it's not just the corruption that's just been happening over the past decade or the past few decades, especially the one in Venezuela. I feel it has a deeper story behind it. And in order to really get to the gist of all of that and the depth of all of that, you need to ask yourself, how did this place turn that way? aside from what we already know about it, right? So there's some form of infiltration of energy that happened in these places, some of them that used to be sacred places. And I feel that's where more of the answers lie. But yes, obviously now you're going to have this entire migrant issue, which I personally don't even believe a lot of them are going to end up sticking around in New York just because of our winter being super harsh. And them being in Texas and Arizona and those places where it's perpetually warm, even in the winter, that kind of makes a little bit more sense. But I'm not sure they're actually going to stick around here. Now, once again, we're going to see in the future, but there's just so much that goes into that. And of course, it's going to change landscapes and it's going to change, the culture of everything. Okay, so I think that's all I had to say. One more thing that I wanted to briefly dive into is that the term psychedelic is derived from the Greek words psyche and I guess delone or delaun. So psyche, yeah, delic is like delone. So psyche, soul, mind, and the delic part means to manifest. It's kind of like a mind manifester or a soul manifester, meaning manifesting with your mind. I feel there's always so many people who've never really taken psychedelics don't really understand what they're really about. Let's put it that way. So people are quick to demonize them. Now, this might deserve another video at one point. I'm not sure it's going to be anytime soon or whatever, but I feel you just can't be quick to demonize something that you haven't really taken or you don't really understand the background of. And of course, there are things like entity possession, entity attachments, and all these other things that happen when you take them, especially in the group setting, all of that. I have a video out there with ayahuasca and how I personally would never take ayahuasca because I really strongly believe you also need to be called by certain plants, or you need to be called. It's kind of like a plant medicine. I'm not talking about acid. I'm not talking about these synthetic psychedelics that are lab made, which were really, really big in the 1960s and on, which was kind of the hippie era, right? But I'm talking more about natural psychedelics. And so I feel there's so many things that go into that, but I just wanted to put out there what it actually means. So it means soul or mind manifesting or manifestation. Okay, and also everything has a consciousness, everything around you, including the plants, including your animals, your pets. And when you hear something like rain or wind or whatever, in my opinion, like when I was taking that one journey that I was on, rain actually felt the most natural out of all the noises that I kind of heard during that particular journey or whatever. And so overall, what I really want to emphasize in this particular video, I know I focused a lot on the noise and how they can alter the noises in your environment or have noise working through people. But I feel what I really want to emphasize is that your mind is one of the most powerful tools. And if your mind's capable of imagining things or them kind of being able to push things into your mind, it would be very beneficial for you to be in full control of your mind, so that the more in control you are of your mind, the less programming they can do on your mind. And I feel psychedelics kind of tie into that as well, at least for some people, not for all people. I know for some people, they can be detrimental because of certain chemical components in people's system. Okay, all right, that's all I wanted to say. And I hope this makes sense. Let me know what you think. And talk to you very soon in an upcoming video. Until then, bye guys.